So kia ora koutou and welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along to our Climate Action Programme information session. Just checking that everyone can hear me. If you can't, somehow let me know. So the changing climate is one of the most significant threats facing the planet today, and scientists agree that the warming planet can be attributed to the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This makes addressing emissions a key sustainability challenge for businesses. And it's an area that even small businesses can do something about. So what is climate action and why are we running a program on it? More importantly, what does this mean for you? Today, we're going to answer these questions. We're going to talk about carbon emissions in the context of the fashion industry, a little bit about the science, what taking climate action means, and where it sits within your broader sustainability work. And then we're going to run through how we are going to help you within your business to start to address this topic. And then we'll hear firsthand from one of our members who has already gone through this process, so they'll really be able to share some insights with us. I'm delighted to announce that we have partnered with ECOS to create the Mindful Fashion Climate Action Programme. ECOS will help us to develop industry-specific guidance and tools to help you measure your carbon footprints, to understand your emissions profiles, and to develop reduction strategies. ECOS is a carbon management and regenerative carbon project specialist organisation. It's a mouthful, which means that if you want to certify your footprints once you've been through the program, you can easily do this. So alongside me today, you'll also hear from Mei Chang from ECOS, who's on the Zoom. She's going to talk about the science and climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And you'll hear from Tui Moore from Juliet Hogan about the challenges and learnings from going through the process. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So we're hoping to wrap up by 11:45. If any questions pop up along the way, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we can get to them at the end. But otherwise, let's get going. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. Just making sure I've let everybody in. So our vision at Mindful Fashion, we're working towards creating a fashion industry in Aotearoa where people and nature thrive within planetary boundaries. This industry is low carbon because we know it needs to be. It's more circular because we know that resource use needs to be optimised, and it's regenerative so that we can actually create some benefits for our people and for nature. Our climate action program is designed to get you started on your journey to understand where your climate impacts are coming from using science and data, and to understand how you can contribute to reducing emissions at the rate we need to meet our global commitments. We know from our own Mindful Fashion survey last year that over 90% of our members want to measure their emissions, but most haven't started yet. We also know that the main reasons why small businesses delay tackling their carbon emissions include concerns around lack of skills or skills they may not have yet, the high cost involved, and the lack of time. There's also a common misconception that as SMEs, we are too small to make a significant impact, or that this only applies to large corporates. SMEs actually make up 90% of businesses, both worldwide and in New Zealand, and they affect the livelihoods of about 2 billion people. The combined CO2 from SMEs is estimated to contribute 60 to 70% of industrial pollution. So SMEs definitely have a role to play. In fact, what's important to remember, I think, is that all of us have a role to play. This is a global challenge. So we've created the Mindful Fashion Program to address these barriers of time, cost, and knowledge so that we can all do our part. So how is climate change related to fashion? The fashion industry plays a significant role, with apparel and footwear contributing up to 8% of global emissions. This is comparable to the annual greenhouse gas emissions of the entire EU. And the industry is on track to increase its emissions 50% by 2030. This is a problem because we know from the science that we need to be going the other way. In 2015, 197 governments of the world, including New Zealand, signed the Paris Agreement, agreeing to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and preferably in line with 1.5 degrees by 2050. To do this requires a reduction in emissions, yet our industry is well on track to increasing them, as you can see in this graph. The Fashion on Climate report revealed that if the fashion industry does not accelerate its response to climate change, by 2030 it will produce around twice the volume of emissions required to align with the Paris Agreement of a 1.5 degree pathway. So in fashion, the emissions come from right across the supply chain, from the way that we make our clothes to how we sell them, to how we ship them, to how they're cared for. As well as creating emissions, we also face, as an industry, we face growing risks from the resulting changes in climate that are threatening the ability of businesses to actually just continue to operate. These are businesses that we rely on in our supply chains. We're already seeing things like increasing water scarcity in cotton producing countries that rely on water to grow crops, to dye and finish textiles. We're seeing increasing costs and regulations on air emissions and carbon taxes. We're seeing physical risk for buildings and infrastructure from more frequent and severe climate events such as storms, flooding, and extended periods of excessive heat. And we're seeing reduced access to labour in garment producing countries due to populations moving because of climate change impacts happening on the ground, particularly in the global south, countries like Bangladesh and India. This is already happening now. So the fashion industry globally is taking action to address emissions with numerous programs and alliances and pacts that have been set up. In December 2018, a group of leading global fashion brands and NGOs launched the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action under the United Nations. The Charter recognises the importance of meeting the goals agreed in the Paris Accord and a 1.5 degree pathway, and it sets out a series of commitments, including a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of 45% by 2030, and other commitments such as sourcing 100% renewable electricity, sourcing environmentally friendly raw materials, and phasing out coal from supply chains. We are also seeing leading businesses set science-based targets to reduce their emissions aligned to this, from Levi's to Adidas to Allbirds and many more. And we also need to do our thing, play our part on this in New Zealand too. To give you a bit of background, I would like to hand over to Mei Chang from ECOS now to tell us more about climate change, carbon footprints and emissions and why we need to measure and reduce. Mei works with ECOS as a carbon analyst and has been working in the environmental industry for over 10 years, specialising in greenhouse gas emissions. Over to you, Mei. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Cool. Thanks, Jacinda. I will stop the video and I'll start sharing my screen. Just one moment. Okay, how's that? Can you see the full slides now?
Yeah, great.
Okay. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to deliver an info session on climate change actions and the big picture of the problems. Just a summary of the presentation. I'll quickly run over what's climate change, what's carbon footprint and emissions, why measuring and reducing is important. Jacinda's already covered the global context, so I'll cover more the national regulatory context, how businesses here are responding, and any drivers and reputational risk, etc. So let's start by looking at what is climate change. Climate change encompasses a number of environmental consequences, traditionally known as global warming. It is when a buildup of atmospheric gases trap the heat, resulting in an average rise of global temperature. there's enough media coverage, scholarly articles, etc. out there that I think the average consumer is now well educated enough to know that climate change is not just about feeling warmer in general. Changes in the balance will cause extreme weather events, and that affects everyone differently all around the world. Greenhouse gases are made up of 6 different gases. Carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide are just the common ones. There are also industrial gases such as hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride, and each gas has different level of potency or greenhouse effect, known as the global warming potential, the GWP. For example, 1 kg of methane is the equivalent of 25 kg of carbon dioxide. Depending on which version of the IPCC report you're referencing to, this figure can change within a range of 21 to 80. And N2O, for example, has a GWP of 273. It is too difficult to report all these different numbers of gases individually, so we combine them while taking into account their GWP and call it tons carbon dioxide equivalent, represented as TCO2e. So when everything is reported in terms of carbon, it is therefore your carbon footprint. So why do we need to measure? First of all, you can't understand something or begin to know where and what to reduce without first measuring it and setting a benchmark. If I tell you your carbon footprint is 12 or 200, it means nothing to you because what does that even mean and what are you comparing this to? In terms of the national regulatory context, both the market demand and the political climate indicate that reaching a net zero position is now a reality, with a zero carbon bill passing, indicating the target for New Zealand to reach this by 2050. Naturally, the pressure for New Zealand to achieve this will be passed down to individual businesses. Understanding your business's existing and potential liability is the sooner the better. Putting a price on carbon is not new. It's been around since 2008 when New Zealand introduced the emissions trading scheme. The ETS initially only captured a handful of sectors, and more are being added each year until inevitably everyone will be captured or affected in some form or another. So how are New Zealand businesses responding to this? They might be looking at what their liability is now or what's it going to look like in the next 10 to 30 years. Here's a graph showing what the carbon price was back in circa 2010. The market price for New Zealand-based forestry credit, NZU, was $20 per credit. 1 tonne of carbon emission equates to 1 carbon credit. And a few years on, you can also buy overseas mass-scale energy sector credits, the CERs, for as little as $2 NZD per tonne. So if you're a business in 2013 with a 1,000-tonne footprint, you can wipe your slate clean with as little as $2,000. Although that's not how carbon credits and offsetting works. I fully support the offset projects, the values and benefits and the underlying fundamentals, but that's a whole other presentation topic. Anyway, $2,000 is very much small change for businesses annually and not much of a liability. And today, the New Zealand carbon credits are trading above $75 per tonne. It peaked earlier this year just over $80 a tonne. You can still buy overseas credits cheaper, but if you're intending on offsetting with NZUs only, you'll find that they come at a high premium. In your 1,000 tonne business, it's now costing you more than $75,000 annually to offset. KPMG released their carbon price forecast. They are projecting that by 2050, the average market price for New Zealand credits will be around $444 per tonne. If your business is still producing 1,000 tonne of CO2 per year, it's going to cost you a hell of a lot to reach that net zero position. So that answers the why you want to measure your footprint and why it's crucial to perform this analysis on your business's liability. I won't get into the how step of the measurement too much, as it will take too much time. On this slide, it's just a quick glance at the typical emission sources that business will need to capture. Things like stationary fuels, mobile fuels, agriculture, industrial emissions, electricity, travel, freight, and waste. After you've completed your measurement, your footprint, most companies will require to have this verified, either in the form of an external review or through an audit following the ISO standards. From a reputational risk point of view, this step is essential because not only it adds credibility to your claims, it ensures that all businesses are reporting to the same set of rules or standards, meaning you're more likely to be able to compare apples with apples. If you're planning on reporting any actual carbon reductions or potential emission savings through using a product or service, then this order step is a must, as any environmental claims should be verified for accuracy and transparency to avoid any risk of misleading claims, also known as greenwash, and attract complaints or even fines from the Commerce Commission. The most important steps of all is what comes after having your footprint verified. What strategies are you going to take now that you know what your liabilities are? How are you going to communicate this to your stakeholders? How are you going to motivate or influence your staff about taking actions? This is where the tree of abatement comes in. Taking our 1,000 tonne business as an example again, we want to reduce the footprint as much as possible before thinking about offsetting it, given where the carbon price is going. So we look to the bottom of the abatement tree and search for metaphorical low-hanging fruits. These are actions that take low to no cost to implement and usually involves a policy change or a behaviour change. Remember that if you reduce your expenditure, you will generally reduce emissions. So on a basic level, if you can reduce usage of energy, travel, fuels, you immediately impact the bottom line. So it's an instant cost saving. Slightly higher up the abatement tree, you may start considering your procurement policy, paying perhaps a little extra for using suppliers that are either low emissions, such as renewable energy generation, meaning their electricity has lower emissions than their competitors, thus reducing your own, or even suppliers that's gone the extra mile and are carbon neutral, meaning they have already offset their aspect of emissions for you. For example, carbon neutral paper, freight supply, or Ecotricity's electricity. So paying a little premium to reduce your offset requirement is another way to reduce your liability. Next, moving up the tree, you start weighing up the different levels of investment to achieve increased efficiency. At the lower end of the capital investment scale could be more energy efficient office equipment or upgrading your vehicle fleet to more fuel efficient models, hybrids or even EVs. Higher end of the investment scale could be installing solar panels, building green or passive buildings, or other big ticket items that you see a return from. At the highest end of the tree, where the investment outweighs the return or benefit you will get from it, and where the cost of buying offset is actually cheaper than investing in emissions reduction initiatives, then it will make sense to buy carbon credits to offset these emissions. This is a moving scale based on the cost of carbon and cost of technology and needs to be reassessed on a regular basis. So I actually blasted it really quickly. To summarise, we've covered what climate change is, why you need to measure and reduce offset, the importance of verification for managing reputational risk, and finally some emissions reduction strategies. Next steps, take your newfound passion for climate reporting and start assessing your business. There are lots of resources available to help guide you on the journey, whether it's spreadsheet tools, online software. All you need to do is start gathering the required data and talk to trusted experts, such as Jacinda and our team at ECOS, with a wealth of knowledge to assist you along the way. Now that we've identified the problem, there's no better time to start the crusade. Time to step up and be the solution, and some heroes don't wear fashionable capes. I will pass back to you, Jacinda.
Thanks, May. That was a great way to end. Thank you so much for filling us in a bit more on the science. Brings a lot of questions to my head. I'm not sure about everybody else. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about why you should do it and where this fits within your sustainability work, and then introduce our program to you. So if the science wasn't enough of a reason, we know that customers and employees really care about this stuff as well. Research increasingly shows that employees care about the conscience of the businesses they work for. So KPMG's research in 2022 showed us that 70% of employees are more likely to want to work for a company that has a strong environmental stance. And Gen Z in particular are even more concerned. They're the first generation to prioritise purpose over salary. So in an increasingly competitive job market, businesses with a sustainability stance, such as on climate, are much more likely to attract and retain skilled workers. There's also increasing customer expectations around businesses taking climate action. It can not only enhance the reputation of your brand, but in fact, it's fast becoming business as usual, in this in particular in the fashion industry, with businesses such as Allbirds talking about the climate impact of footwear, for example. It also makes business sense, as May talked about. Improved efficiencies can lead to reduced costs, and it can also spur all kinds of innovations, from reducing waste to the development of less carbon intensive products. So there's a lot of really good reasons why it actually makes good business sense to start to take climate action, as well as the fact that it's good for the planet. So where does this sit in the sustainability context of your business? It's really important to keep in mind that addressing carbon emissions is just part of a broader sustainability agenda. Climate action is definitely interconnected with most other areas of sustainability. In fact, I would say all: materials, biodiversity, waste, water, worker health and well-being, communities. And we know that it's not all that your business will be working on. I just wanted to share the Mindful Fashion Sustainability Framework that we created last year, which illustrates this broader sustainability context that fashion businesses are facing, to help illustrate that. And this is available on our website for anybody that hasn't seen it. The Sustainable Development Goals are another framework that also illustrate this greater context. The climate crisis and the wider Sustainable Development Goals are looking like they'll dominate discussions in the coming decade as we move closer to 2030 and the goals that have been set globally by governments and world organisations. So really, just to reiterate the point that the evolution of sustainability within a business is a journey. As a business, one of your first steps really needs to be getting clear on your sustainability values as an organisation, and then understanding where you want to go, so that you can start to look at where are you now, which is what we're looking at addressing with our climate program, and then how do we get to where we want to go. For climate action, that's exactly what we're going to do. So what does our program look like? Finally, we get to it. Introducing the Mindful Fashion New Zealand Fashion Industry Climate Program. What we plan to do over 4 to 5 months is take a group of mindful fashion businesses, as many as want to participate, through the process of measuring their carbon emissions and developing reduction strategies. It's open to all of our members and it's free to take part. We will start with running an online introductory 2-hour workshop, co-run between Mindful Fashion, myself and ECOS, to get you started. We will look at what data you need to collect, what the tools are that we've created for you. We are developing proprietary industry-specific guidance to help you understand and work through the process. We're going to provide regular check-ins, something along the lines of perhaps a 2-weekly online Zoom for anyone that's interested in dropping by, and we'll also have on-call support available when you need it. The idea behind all of this is to help you get your number, to understand what your organisation's carbon footprint is, so that we can then go, right, how do we now make steps, as May was talking about on that tree of abatement, how do we start to make steps to reduce it? We're then going to hold a second workshop once we all know our number, to develop reduction strategies. We've designed this as an affordable and really accessible way for small businesses to get started on their carbon reduction journey. And as part of this program, you will also have the opportunity, if you would like, to contribute to a roadmap that we're developing for New Zealand's fashion industry, to look at how we can collectively reduce emissions in line with global targets. So this is a little bit about the timeline and what that's going to look like. I've also tried to include the time commitment, just to give you an indication of how much time it might require from you. But that is very much going to depend on the size of your business, the way that you currently collect data around transactional information and store it. So it's really going to be specific to an individual business, and hopefully Tui will be able to fill us in a bit more about how long it took her at Juliette Hogan. So we're going to kickstart the program towards the end of July. We're looking at probably the 28th of July at this stage, with a 2-hour workshop to introduce the tools, the guidance, and get businesses started looking at what information they need to collect, where to find it, and how to gather it, and how to record it. And then that will take 2 hours. And then the second part will be businesses going away from July through to September, through to the end of September, and gathering that data with regular check-ins and on-call support with Mindful Fashion during that period to, if any roadblocks come up or any assistance is required. That will take between 10 and 30 hours, but again, that is very broad brush strokes estimate, hard to tell at this point. Depends on your business. Thirdly, once you've gathered the data, it will be a matter of entering it into the very simple tool that we have developed with ECOS, which will then allow you to know your number. The tool will give you a printout report and summary of your emissions, which you will then be able to bring along to the workshop that we're holding in towards the end of October, where we will group together as a group, potentially online, maybe in person if we are all in one region, and we will identify reduction strategies specific to your type of business. So we do know that within our membership we have fashion brands, we have retailers, we have manufacturers, we have individual sole traders. So we have a real range of businesses that are all going to have quite different footprints, and will have different areas where they can identify reduction strategies. So we want to look at how we can group businesses together with like-minded similar businesses, and look at where we can create reduction strategies that work across a range of businesses. And then the fifth part will be then going away, like you as a business, then having an action plan to go away and start to implement some of these reduction strategies. Once you know your number, so after we've got through stage 3, there will be the opportunity to have that footprint verified and or certified by ECOS, and they're offering that at a reduced fee for anyone that wants to go through with that process. And we'll talk more about that in the first workshop, because there's a lot more to why you might want to do that or not, but just to give you an indication of how that will work. So here is an example of, and I know May talked a little bit about this, but just to give you a picture of what you might come out of this, going through this program with. This is an example of a company's carbon footprint. It's quite a small company, and they produce a product that they sell through retail stores. They don't have their own retail stores. And this is an overview of their footprint. So they produce 19.4 tonnes of CO2 equivalent in the financial year that this was reported against. And their main organisational emissions categories, as you can see here, come from predominantly from fuel use within their own company vehicles and non-company vehicles, from flights, from freight, and from purchased energy, which in this case was electricity. So that's an indication of what some of you might be looking at for a carbon footprint for your business. As with all sustainability work, there are always things that are in your control and things that are out of your control. And in the case of carbon emissions, what your suppliers are doing is likely out of your control directly. However, things like freight, your fuel, your travel are things within your control. So when we start to develop reduction strategies, it's likely that's where we will start to look. A caveat you may have noticed on the slide earlier on in the presentation, that brands' operations or businesses' operations are only one part of the emissions of a fashion company. We know from global reports that the majority of emissions for a fashion business come from the production and the use of their products, the upstream and downstream supply chain. And we're aiming to expand into these in phase 2 of our program. It's not common for businesses to look at these emissions in their first year of measuring. The first year of measuring is really to understand the organisational footprint and start to understand how to collect data and how to how to measure and manage it before starting to expand into categories where it's a lot more challenging to gather information. But there's a lot of potential, both with our organisational footprints and then when we do expand into our supply chain, to really make change, from improving materials to better supply chain data, to the use of technology, to extending the life of our materials and our products themselves. So there's a lot that we can potentially do once we get started on this journey. So just to reiterate why you should participate, while all of you can make progress in reducing your emissions under your own control, what I'm really excited about is the transformational change that we can create collectively by working together, by pulling together as different businesses, working with our suppliers within New Zealand. Perhaps it's working with electricity suppliers or freight suppliers, working with other businesses and other stakeholders. We actually have a really great opportunity to reduce emissions across our whole sector in New Zealand, which is really exciting. So it's a great opportunity for you to be supported in your carbon journey and contribute to the bigger picture. I'm going to be sending out an email next week letting you know how you can take part, and I'm really happy to answer any questions. I know we've just really touched on this at a high level, but first it would be really good if we can hear from Tui, from Juliette Hogan, a bit more about what's involved in going through this process and maybe some of her insights before we go to the Q&A. Thanks, Tui.
Thanks, Jacinta. Kia ora, everyone. So yeah, I'm the Sustainability Program Manager at Juliette Hogan. And so Jacinta, just as she said, wanted me to speak to you today about our experience with measuring our carbon emissions, which we did using the Toitu Carbon Assess tool for both FY20 and FY21. So in terms of the resourcing required for measuring your emissions, it's all about the time spent upfront gathering the data required. Because my role is a hybrid between finance and sustainability, I was lucky enough to have the advantage of having most of the information I needed sort of at my fingertips. For example, I needed to pull information from several different data sets, such as the DHL My Bill portal, our power supplier portals, from receipts and from Xero. So I'd say that if you are measuring your emissions, I'd suggest that the person who will be carrying out this work, if they don't already, then have access to this type of information, then they'll need to do so in close collaboration with your finance team. And then once you've pulled together all of your data around things like your fuel spend, electricity usage, air travel and freight, and it's really just a matter of doing some calculations and plugging this data into the tool. So basically the time required to do this work will depend on how easily accessible the data you need is to you, but it should hopefully not take you more than a few days worth of time to bring it all together. But that obviously, as Jacinta said, it depends on the size of your business. But yeah, it took me sort of collectively, yeah, probably 2 or 3 days worth of time. The main challenge for me when working on this project was having to pull data from different sites and entities into one consolidated picture of our emissions, because we didn't want to just measure our head office emissions, but emissions across all of our retail sites as well. I also found it wasn't very easy to get an accurate measurement of things like our waste, but I still feel like it's better to be calculating your emissions with an educated sort of estimate than to not be measuring them at all. And once you've been through the exercise and to continue to grow your knowledge around the subject, I'm sure you'll be able to get a more accurate data more quickly every year that you measure. And I guess my final sort of piece of advice for anyone considering if they should do this or not is, as the saying goes, you can't manage what you don't measure. So by going through the process of measuring your emissions benefits you and your business by building your carbon literacy, and it also enables you to use results as a baseline and then plan where you want to go from there. And as Jacinta sort of touched on before, you can focus on how to reduce what you can control, like your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And then you can also consider how you can influence the scope 3 emissions that you can't directly control. I'd definitely say it's a really worthwhile process to go through. And even if you don't have all of the sort of exact information available to get your measurement completely accurate to the, to the letter, at least you'll get a really good idea of the areas you need to focus on and can start to set some targets from there. So yeah, that's sort of my learnings and things.
Thanks so much, Tui. Such a good point about the accuracy of data. So I've had a little bit of experience myself with measuring different organisations' carbon footprints, and that's something I've come up against as well, and not necessarily being able to gather 100% accurate data in the first year is okay. It is a case of getting the best data that you can within reason. You don't want to do something that's going to take you 45 hours if it's something that only contributes 1% to your carbon footprint. So there's definitely a lot of leeway in there for this to be flexible and to make it achievable. And just really, we want businesses to get started and, as you said, Tui, to improve that data collection process and the accuracy of that data over time. So that's definitely something that shouldn't scare anybody off. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the program. We're really keen to take as many of our businesses through this process as we can. It's going to be like this amount of support that's on offer is going to be available sort of for this period of time, but that'll be it. So it's really like, this is the time to do it. The guidance will be sitting there, the tool will be sitting there, but you won't have this sort of one-on-one mentorship and guidance if you choose to do it in 6 months' time. So I realise that's a bit of pressure, but we've been lucky enough to secure some funding from MFE and Whakatupu Aotearoa to help get this going, and ECOS has come on board as a partner, so it's really exciting that we can sort of crack into it for the next 6 months and make a start. So yeah, any questions from anybody? I take it that means that you're all going to sign up immediately and you're keen to get going. Great. So if there's no questions, this recording will be available. We'll share it in our newsletter next week. I know there's about another sort of 10 or 15 people that are really keen but couldn't make this time. So we're hoping to get a cohort of about 20 businesses to go through at the same time, which I think will be an incredible learning experience for everybody. And okay, here's a question. This is good. One moment. So the cost. So unfortunately, May has had to jump off the call. She's had a sick son. She might have been able to answer this specifically, but the cost to become certified is going to depend on the size of your business. So depending on the volume of carbon emissions that your business produces, there will be a cost to have your footprint verified to make sure that it's accurate, and then there'll be a cost if you want to get certified, which means certified carbon zero or certified climate positive. There'll be a cost to purchase carbon offsets, and that will depend on the actual volume of carbon that you emit that you're wanting to offset against. So we've been given a discount from ECOS for businesses to have their footprints verified so that they can offset that. I can't share the exact cost with you now, but I think it's a 50% saving or something like that for anyone that's taking part in our program. So the verification cost will be, I think, between $500 and $800, and then there'll be an additional cost of offsetting above that, which again comes down to how many emissions you generate as a business. Anything else? Okay, great. Well, no, there's no cost for members to participate. So we're running this as a pilot from July through to sort of November. And once the pilot has gone through, and we might sort of get some learnings from that, which might cause us to review our guidance documents. Once we've been through that process, we'll then make those guidance documents available potentially to the wider industry, potentially for a fee. We're not quite sure, but the guidance will always be free for members the ongoing support that myself and ECOS will provide over the next sort of 4 to 5 months will only be for that period of 4 to 5 months, but the guidance will be there the entire time, and it will always be free for members. Even more reason to do it. We're also looking at working with ECOS to create some sort of logo that we can attribute to businesses that participate in the Mindful Fashion climate program that we work on with ECOS, and so we'll be able to communicate more about that to you in July at the first workshop as well. But otherwise, if there's any questions that pop up that you think of after we've finished, please just email me, and yeah, I'll follow up again with all of you later, probably next week now, and be looking for sign-ups. So yeah, thanks everyone, and yeah, please make the most of it. It's a great opportunity to get free support to measure your footprint with a verified carbon analyst specialist company. Yeah. Kia ora. Talk soon.